Yes, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader clashing over the NHS. Jeremy Corbyn deploying his new strategy for PMQs, which is to focus on one issue and kind of develop that. He hadn't done that over the initial few months of his position as opposition leader, but it came to a kind of crescendo over NHS funding and mental health funding. Perhaps the most significant exchange, though, was the question by the ex-Shadow Cabinet Minister Lisa Nandy, who puts to Theresa May this issue of what she knew and when about the child abuse inquiry and the resignation of Dame Lowell Goddard. Remember, she was the Home Secretary that set up the inquiry, and just recently she has resigned, and there have been some allegations about her conduct in that matter. Let's just take that exchange between Lisa Nandy and the Prime Minister from a few moments ago in the House to remind us of what happened there.
One of the important aspects of this is that over the years, too many people have had concerns that people in positions of power have intervened to stop them from getting justice. There were stories around about the inquiry and about individuals related to the inquiry, but the Home Secretary cannot intervene on the basis of suspicion, rumour or hearsay. She refers to the statement that was made yesterday in this House. She refers to the statement that was made yesterday in this House about information being discussed with Director General in the Home Office. She will also have noted that that conversation was asked to be confidential, and it was, as far as I'm aware, treated as such. I think it is important for us to recognise that when the Home Office was officially informed of issues, the Home Office acted. It's now for the inquiry to get on and deliver for victims and survivors.
So a tough moment there for the Prime Minister, acknowledging that there was suspicion, rumour and some hearsay about the conduct of the child abuse inquiry. It's been beset by a raft of resignations, a sensitive moment for the Prime Minister there, but also some moments on Brexit from Ken Clarke, and a birthday wish for Peter Bone, the veteran Eurosceptic. With me to discuss this is a smaller than normal panel as we're on tour in the parliamentary lobby. James Heappey, the Conservative MP for Wales, and John Healey, the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing in the Shadow Cabinet, back in the Shadow Cabinet. What did you make of exchanges today, James?
I thought it was a good set of exchanges. I thought the Labour Party were probably more united behind their man than they had been previously, and it was a good tussle between the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister.
On health, I mean, it's the perennial issue a Labour opposition leader raises. Does it actually get you anywhere?
Yes, and I think Theresa May is in trouble on the NHS. She can't claim, as she did today, to be, quote, giving the NHS an extra £10 billion when the boss of the NHS this week says she's not. And she can't be saying we're giving all the money that the NHS has asked for when the boss of the NHS says she's not. And in the end, what counts is what people see and feel, and people know the NHS is in crisis. They're looking to the government to do something new with a new Prime Minister, but there are no answers, there's no change, and the pressure on the NHS is mounting, especially as we go into winter.
She had quite a retort on that. Where Labour is in government in Wales, NHS has been squeezed.
Where Labour's in government, like the 13 years when we were in government in the UK, the NHS was rebuilt, and people know that the NHS was so much better under Labour and goes downhill as it has been doing for 6 years under the Conservatives. And it's people's perception that really matters. So claims about big figures, claims about large numbers of people being treated just don't count when people know that A&E departments are in breakdown, hospital wards are overcrowded, underfunded, and patients, millions of patients, are waiting months for the vital treatments that they need.
I mean, that statistic, James, about NHS trust and deficit is just clear, isn't it? That it was 8% six or 7 years ago, and now it's nearly 70%.
And my own trusts in Somerset are in deficit too. It is a fact that the government has put more money into the NHS since 2010. The challenge is demand is rising faster than that funding can keep pace with.
So you agree with that? They have put more money in, haven't they? but
They put more money in. They've not put as much as they said they have. They've not put as much in as they said they promised to. But the problem in the end really is partly of the Conservatives causing a huge, costly, complex reorganisation at the beginning of their term in office.
I don't agree with that.
Which cost £3 billion, which is the size of the deficit this year.
No, because what we're seeing now down in Somerset is that clinicians are being empowered to look at what the challenge is. We've got an ageing population, and the clinicians are saying, well, this is how we most effectively spend a health budget to make it work. We could just keep feeding the beast with more and more money with the NHS as it is, and we would never keep pace. But by restructuring the NHS, so now bottom-up clinicians are taking the decisions, I think we'll end up coming up with a much smarter way of doing healthcare and social care in this country.
so that's merging social care, and there were some issues around mental health too were raised by Jeremy Corbyn. It was quite sober exchanges on that issue, that important issue of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's very easy to make political points at this. We absolutely should not. This is the challenge of our time. Ensuring parity of esteem between mental and physical health care is essential. It needs more resource. There's much more work to do to achieve parity, and the sooner government can do that, the better.
So why didn't...
That was a sober, sensible start. And in my time here, I've seen really the concern about mental health services really rise. And I think
so some nice cross-party bipartisanship.
And the bipartisanship between the Prime Minister and the Labour leader was important. But actually doing it, making the change, coming up with the answers that helps us see that happen. And one of the strong points about Jeremy Corbyn still is he does talk and give voice to the concerns that ordinary people had. This time it was Colin.
Well, you're sounding like you never went away.
This time it was Colin. And, the number of people that all of us in our constituencies have now suffering from mental ill health and a lot of other problems as well tells us that we've got to do better.
So you're seeing him as a future Prime Minister?
Any Labour Prime Minister, any Labour government's better than a Conservative Prime Minister.
You didn't really answer that question.
That's our task. To win over the public now and to pull together to do it.
Right, okay, so why did he not do the more political thing that was left to Lisa Nandy, the former Home Secretary of the Prime Minister, on a sticky wicket as regards this issue of the sex abuse inquiry and what she knew and when?
Jeremy Corbyn gave voice to people's overriding concerns at the moment, which is about the crisis in the NHS. And Lisa Nandy also had Theresa May, I think, in serious trouble. It was a very good question. And Theresa May cannot draw a distinction between what the Home Office was officially told and when, and then reacted, and what the Home Office was unofficially, privately or confidentially told and didn't react. And in the end, she's been in government for 6 years, I've been in government. Government doesn't work like that, and that will not hold. She's under pressure, and she's going to have to come up with better answers than she did today.
She seemed to acknowledge that she had heard the rumours. She used the word rumours.
I think she's stuck between the devil and deep blue sea, because this inquiry has become a monster. The scope that it is to now investigate, hugely politically sensitive, and quite rightly, the survivors of child sex abuse want answers and want a completely transparent process. So the Home Secretary could not have acted on rumour and things she had heard confidentially, because she couldn't have been transparent about the decision she had taken. As soon as the complaint was made officially, the Home Office acted immediately, and I think that's what we need to credit the Home Secretary with having done.
Look, from the outside, people watching this, the amount of money that's gone in, £17 million, 4 chairs, resigning lawyers. I mean, is it just impossible to do? Someone's been incompetent here. Who is it?
Well, in my view, it's just grown arms and legs. From what started out as being a very, very plausible, credible inquiry into institutionalised child sex abuse has become something much, much bigger, almost unachievable. It's become sort of the poison chalice, I guess, of public inquiries. We need to look, I think, at how achievable it is, because the survivors need answers, and they need answers from an inquiry that they trust. They trust the result.
Would you suggest narrowing the scope in some way?
Well, first of all, I think Theresa May deserves credit for setting up the inquiry in the first place. It's clearly has spiralled, and it's spiralled really beyond control. The question, though, here is for Theresa May now, as the former Home Secretary and now Prime Minister, what did she and the Home Office know when about the particular problems that led to the latest crisis and the criticisms and accusations about Lord Justice Goddard?
OK, gentlemen, let's just take the Ken Clarke exchange with the Prime Minister over the issue of Brexit. Let's just take that.
One or more Brexiteer members of her cabinet have been briefing the newspapers copiously on every proposal being put forward in papers to the relevant cabinet committee by their colleagues and launching political attacks on their cabinet colleagues who seem to disagree with them. Will she take firm action to stop this process, and will she also agree that the proper approach is parliamentary scrutiny of the broad strategy once her government have reached agreement on what it should be?
Prime Minister.
I say to my right honourable friend, the government is very clear that the vote on the 23rd of June was a vote to ensure that we had control of movement of people from the EU into the UK, but also we want to see the best possible access for businesses for trading in goods and services with and operating within that European market. That is what the government will be aiming for, and we will be ambitious in that. Parliament will have its say. There's going to be lengthy negotiations over the course of those 2 years and more. Parliament will have its say in a whole variety of ways, not least of course, in relation to the Great Repeal Bill.
So the Prime Minister there saying Parliament will have its say, but clearly Ken Clarke's concerns about this argument in the Cabinet playing out on the newspaper front pages. I mean, it's not a great look for your party, James.
No, I think that there's a real job of work to be done, sort of move on from the debates of the spring and actually get on now with thinking about what Brexit means.
It's not happening in Cabinet, is it?
Well, I think that there's some great ideas coming out in Cabinet. There are clearly some disagreements. I would prefer to see a bit more unity around the Prime Minister on this than there perhaps is at the moment. But this is a huge task for the government to do, and it's right that there's a sort of intellectual knocking of heads at the top so that we make sure that we come out with the best plan.
You're not united either on this, are you? Parts of Corbyn's team want to leave the single market because part of them want to see a big crash because it's going to be the future.
No, I think over the last week, Labour from the front bench and the back benches has done a very good job of asking the hard questions of the government, and it's in the government's hands. And this is no way to run a government, and it's certainly no way to run a government that's got a chance of doing the best deal that we need.
What's your plan
for Brexit? Well, on the particular point that Ken Clarke raised, and he's absolutely right, Parliament should have more than just a say. And Ken Clarke led for trade in the last government under David Cameron, so he knows that, for instance, on the European Union trade negotiations with the US, the European Commission as the negotiator published their negotiation strategy, had it debated and approved by the European Parliament and the European Council of Ministers, and so there's no reason why what's good enough for Europe isn't good enough for Britain for us now.
Would you want to see that? The broad terms of the negotiation strategy published?
No, I think that would make it extraordinarily difficult to go out into Europe and to get the right deal if you've sort of said, here are the cards we're holding right now.
Okay.
I think the government...
Something a bit more higher level, just the general... What are your priorities?
No, absolutely.
You want to be able to scrutinise that.
Yeah, but I don't like the whole sort of hard Brexit, soft Brexit thing. I think that's that's just trying to create a binary decision where one doesn't exist.
Do you think Parliament should vote ahead of the A50?
Well,
broad negotiation.
I think that Parliament should have a say. When that is actually matters to me a lot less, simply because the referendum has been had, the result has been achieved. We must make sure we now deliver what the people have told us to. I think we'd be really letting down our constituents if we were even to think about unstitching what they voted.
Just one last point. Some Conservative MPs on the Liberal side of the party, newer MPs, 2015 intake, a bit nervous about some of the general mood music, saying things like, I didn't get elected to enact the UKIP manifesto. Do you understand where they're coming from?
Well, I'm on that wing of the party. I came through a Lib Dem marginal seat myself. But I'm clear that that's what the British public voted for. Even in my constituency, by a small margin, that's what the constituency voted for. I've got a responsibility to see that through here.
OK, so an interesting time in Parliament. They'll be off to vote for various committee chairs. No scoop just yet on who they're going to vote for. That's happening within Parliament. But in both parties, some interesting dynamics, shall I say, on this tough time in British politics as regard Brexit and other things. Back to you, Colin and Jane in the studio.